Week 17 is over. The fantasy championships are officially written in stone for the 2023 NFL season. But are we really approaching the real fantasy season? Playoff best ball is here. The FFPC playoff challenge is here. And it's also showdown slate season in the NFL playoffs. We'll take you through all that and more on Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally Fist Boys. You're right.
All right, we made it. We made it through the 2023 fantasy season. And I mean, I don't know about you, Drico. My results weren't fantastic for best ball this season, but all in all, I would say it was a pretty successful fantasy season. Had a bunch of good teams that had some fun sweats all along the way. But I think at the end of the day, it's not about how much you win. It's about the friends that you make along the way, right?
Well, definitely feel that I won this season. Making friends with you.
Oh.
I was honestly so pumped heading into the playoffs. Like I'd gotten so many different exposure things right. And then best ball just got the first week of playoffs just got punched in the face. I was talking to you about it a little bit. I was like a little bitter bitch. I was totally tilting. I was really upset about it. But after about a week, I said, I just can't do anything about what's past. Can only focus on the future. And I think in the last week I've entered, and this is probably nothing to most people. I've entered about 40 different playoff basketball after having not done any before. So trying to turn the corner.
I'm glad I got you to get into playoff best ball. I think I get to take credit for that, right?
Sure.
Yeah, honestly, I would have been a little bit more of a salty bitch myself with the way that the season shook out for me for the regular season stuff. I learned from last year. I did the stupid thing of going back when I saw Mike Evans go off in week 17 and one of my 4 DK Millie semifinals teams had Mike Evans on it. I think also had DJ Moore. I went back and looked at that one and realized I probably would have won all the money. It's I don't need I'm never going to do that again.
Unnecessary information.
Yeah, it was like it's like the dead dove inside, do not open, and I opened it. It's I don't know what I expected. Now I'm sad. This was really stupid. So I didn't do that this season. I had some pretty strong teams in the semis, but the semis went pretty poorly for me overall. I was just right about expectation if you just take the neutral advance rate, but man, I didn't have very many dead roster spots. My teams were pretty stacked. They were all optimized for the playoffs with plenty of game stacks, so I was I think I could very reasonably go above the expected advance rate, but did not. Had some okay finishes. But really the thing that has made me the least salty is just getting to fire off at playoff best ball and knowing that after the games wrap this Sunday, I'm going to get to start working on FFPC ownership for the playoff challenge over there, which I'm super, super excited to talk about. I have already started, I think you as well have already started. We've got some of the ship chasing folks who split a Mastiff earlier this year. We took some of that. Did we min cash or did you make semifinals in the Mastiff?
We made the semifinals, I believe.
And Keenan Allen let us down. That's
right.
However,
it still feels like a min cash with we only got 1.5x our entry fee. Yeah. So still feels pretty min cashy.
Yeah. So for those who are not in the 23-man Mastiff co-draft group, which highly recommend co-drafting and voting on picks with 23 different people. It's It's super easy, especially when you make Phil do all of the work. But
I just remember that the power surge of like everybody voting one way and then like trying to argue everybody back.
Oh,
And,
there
like,
was there was some politics. There's some politics for sure. It was pretty funny, honestly. Getting the vote blocks, people going and trying to whip up some votes for their favorite pick. It honestly was a bunch of fun. I feel really bad for
It was
Bill.
stupidly annoying, especially when you got into like the 17th round.
The 17th
five rounds, pure
the second Mastiff that we're doing when we're on round 17 is like, all right, fuck it, guys. We're just taking these. But anyway, that group of 23 min cashers, we have now rolled over our massive winnings from the Mastiff, and they are being diversified across a large number of different playoff contests and formats. So I believe that we have 5 FFPC teams, and you and I are each captaining a subgroup that is in charge of constructing one of the 5 teams. And then we also have 2 entries earmarked for the Big Mitten that myself and Chris G plan on drafting after this weekend slate wraps up. So we have maximum information. We're going to go do those drafts, I believe, over on a leg up stream. We haven't for sure ironed out all the details yet, but keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm sure we'll announce it in the Discord, especially for those of you who have equity in those teams. We'll let you know. So hopefully we can run that up. But anyway, I'm excited for the playoff contest. And I think that's a good segue into the charts for this week, because if you're tuning in here and you're like, what are these 2 idiots going to talk about? Fantasy football season is over. I don't really care about the charts. Well, au contraire, mon frere, fantasy football season is still alive and well for 2023. We've got all of this playoff contest content to go through. And then I also think one of the things that I really like, I think is a strong suit for you, Drico, just in chopping it up with you about best ball, is your ability to kind of get a good read on how the market is going to handle players, and then also have your own take of, the market's going to have, I think about, what you were saying about Rashee Rice, which got me to draft more Rashee Rice near the end of this offseason, when you're saying, he probably should be like a 10th round pick here. Like, it doesn't really make any sense where he's going. And I could easily see him being like a 6th round pick next year. It's just like that. For whatever reason, my brain hadn't gotten to thinking it through that way. And when you said it that way, it helped click for me. And so I definitely think you can provide some really interesting insights to the people for some of the way too early best ball drafts, which, believe it or not, are only a couple months away at this point.
A couple of weeks. I think I heard the FFPC Never Too Early is going to open January 17th.
Man, even for a true disturbed individual like myself, that might be a little too early even for me. I maxed the big board, and that was my one of my better tournaments as far as my advance rate and ROI on it. And yeah, that way too early starting in January might be a little early even for me. I need like a few weeks break before I start firing again. I feel like a spurn from the 23 season. I'm just honestly, I could be the guy who just lost all his chips, like sending even more back. But I just feel ready to go. That's good. You're letting it motivate you, and I think a motivated Drico is something that if you're a competitor, you don't want to see in your lobbies. you fire up the lobby and you see pissed off Drico. I think all of your team names on the FFPC need to have that as some kind of theme.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. Have definitely really enjoyed doing the show with you. Definitely learned a lot from hearing you talk. So excited to get into these charts. Oh, I am not I don't have the present. Okay, so same quarterback chart we've had all season, and honestly, we've one thing that I think is interesting about this chart is we've sort of noted before that we don't have the volume piece in here. We just have the efficiency piece, and this is a very efficiency. This chart is designed to highlight efficiency, both through touchdown rate, and then adjusted yards per attempt, which is like yards per attempt, but rewards touchdowns, punishes interceptions. And I honestly wonder with the sort of variance of playoff best ball, with it being like just 4 weeks of games, and then only for the teams that make to the Super Bowl. I almost wonder if the efficiency stuff is actually of like much greater importance than the volume stuff.
That's an interesting way to frame it, and let me try and dissect it and think through to what I think you're getting at here. Would you say that the reason for that is quarterbacks with these really high efficiencies are the ones that might have access to those spike week games at a higher frequency than the guys with, say, for example, like let's take a volume type guy. Gosh, who's a good volume example?
Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a volume player.
So, and he hasn't been quite as efficient. Now, a big part of his fantasy production in recent weeks has come on the ground through his legs. But would you say it's safe to say that while Josh Allen probably has like lower downside deviation because he has that rushing upside, because he's such a high volume passer, you know, you've got that better downside deviation. It's lower than other quarterbacks, but maybe the rate at which he can access spike weeks could be a little lower than, say, Purdy or Lamar or Dak Prescott, these more efficient quarterbacks. And then the other, to add an additional layer of context to that, that's not to say that Josh Allen can't score points at the same frequency that those guys do that are high point scoring weeks. It's just like within their own distributions of the points that these guys score, Josh Allen doesn't access his ceiling at the same rate that those other guys access their ceiling.
I think that's a reasonable description of the Josh Allen experience. And he's actually, if you look at Josh Allen's fantasy scoring, I think he's the top scorer on the year. But it's a lot more sort of steady Eddie, a little bit like Jalen Hurts. Sort of like you have that. You have the tush push stuff, which is essentially insanely great volume stuff, and doesn't really fail, and definitely has access to a ceiling, but it's a little different than Lamar Jackson, who's insanely efficient, and like almost every game, and then you add a game where he has the volume, like against the Dolphins, and he puts up a score that you can't beat, essentially.
Yeah, I would. I think I've teased this before. I've like talked about this concept, but downside deviation in quarterback is something that I've looked at in the past, and then I'm probably going to do that. That might be one of my projects this off season that I'll have over at Leg Up, and I'll kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and show you guys some of the stuff that I was using to evaluate what quarterbacks were acceptable to take on solo quarterback builds in best ball this season. Because I actually think that's going to be a pretty important, I think it's something that's underutilized by the field right now. It's not something you should do very frequently, but when you do it, you want to make sure you're doing it with the correct archetype of quarterback. And it's kind of an archetype that hasn't been correctly identified or classified, in my opinion. And so I need to pretty that up and make it presentable to other people and not just me. But I think that might be, that's one of my project ideas here for this off season. But anyway, Josh Allen, you know, just as a little spoiler, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts both are two of those quarterbacks that fall into that classification. And that might be like a, well, duh, they're the elite quarterbacks, but it's, you know, not all elite quarterbacks fall into that category. Like Lamar Jackson absolutely does not, because Lamar has a larger downside deviation. There are games where Lamar hits a floor outcome that's more like a true floor outcome for non-elite quarterbacks, where Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts' floor is more like a Jared Goff mean game, right? And that's kind of what you're looking for. But I won't give it all away here.
So the other thing about the efficiency stuff is, so obviously this is for the weeks. This is week 17. So we've got all 17 weeks and 16 weeks of games for each of these players. Mahomes here is sitting in right in the middle here, and I think that's sort of interesting in that like it's like obviously a big down year for Mahomes is like average, which goes to show how good he is. And then obviously you're getting a large discount on Mahomes in playoff best ball, and then I'm guessing you ever have before, and you're getting a large discount on players like on his pass catchers, his wide receiver 1 and 2. It does make me wonder if if the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl, you're going to want to have Chief stacks, obviously, but if that has to be on the back of their defense, does that I guess how much like takeaway can we get from like Mahomes having being one of the lower efficiency players of the quarterbacks there on this chart, especially when you're just looking at playoff guys?
I think there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing I want to think through is like what happens to Patrick Mahomes on this chart? What happens to his adjusted yards per attempt and his TD rate if we give him? Let's live in like total fantasy land right now and say that the Chiefs magically get Marvin Harrison Jr. Okay, so like what happens then? Like how does that change Pat Mahomes? Does he all of a sudden go to like where Tua and Lamar are? Does he get all the way to where Purdy is? How does that change where he sits on the chart?
I mean, I think from a never too early, like next year, like if I'm a betting man, and I sort of am, if you're telling me that I can bet on Mahomes' efficiency being like dramatically better in 2024-2025 season than it was the 23-24 season, like that feels like almost like a sure thing. Whereas like
it's hard to get wide receivers worse than what he has right now, right? Like,
and you're talking about like a pure like nailed on Hall of Fame player. Like just because he has a down year doesn't mean we're adjusting to this new reality where Pat Mahomes isn't that good. Like that's one thing that we do know.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at these guys that are like these elite passers in their prime, you know, like I'd say it's pretty safe to say Pat Mahomes is squarely in his prime right now. Now, the quarterback position is one where as long as the physical traits don't fall off, like your prime can be a pretty large window, right?
Yeah.
But like if you look at guys like Aaron Rodgers, back when Aaron Rodgers was like the quarterback one forever, you know, there were years where he'd go between like quarterback 1 and quarterback 6. And I think he even had one that was like as low as like quarterback 8 or 9, if I'm remembering right. But then every other year around it was like QB1, QB2, QB1, QB2. And so getting these anomalous years where it's like, yeah, it's just a bad year, dude. Like stuff happens. It's a game with a lot of randomness. And this is, you know, probably the worst receiving core he's ever going to have. You know, you're also relying so much on an aging Travis Kelce who suffered an ankle sprain and then came back and basically played through it the whole season. And like just up until like maybe the last 2 weeks, I really felt like I noticed Kelce lacking, you know, explosiveness and burst, you know, even more so than he was looking like prior to the ankle sprain. Like he's definitely gotten older, but before the ankle sprain, it was still like, oh yeah, this guy is one of the best tight ends of the league. Yeah. But for, you know, the majority of this season after that ankle sprain, to me, just, you know, watching the games, watching Kelce is like, dude, there were plays where he tried to turn. And then after trying to turn, he just laid down on the field. It's like, whoops, my ankle can't do that. And he'd like hobble off to the sideline afterwards. There's lots of times where I noticed stuff like that. But in the last 2 weeks, I can think of a couple plays where it's not going particularly well for the Chiefs. And he's like very clearly frustrated, and he just goes Hulk mode and like truck sticks a couple people and like does vintage Kelce looking stuff. And you're like, oh, there's Zeus. That's the dude.
Right.
So I wonder if, you know, a big part of Mahomes' efficiency is you got that hampered Kelce, and then they really weren't willing to fully trust Rashee Rice this season, which I think probably was more of a personnel error than anything, right? Like, I think you just gotta, knowing what your receiver room looks like, you gotta lean into that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mahomes' efficiency in the playoffs actually gets closer to what he's been historically. And yeah, like you said, next season to bet on his efficiency to get a little closer to what he had done historically, I think feels like a pretty good bet to me.
Right. So essentially, if you're drafting Chiefs, you're sort of saying you're telling yourself the story where this early season injury for Kelsey has been hampering him, but come the playoffs, it's playoff time. Like you figure it out, and perhaps we get a much closer to vintage Kelsey than we did this season. I think the other thing that's interesting, and I know this is like a separate thing, if you're betting on the Chiefs to turn it around, like you almost that's reliant on a third guy to emerge, right? Like if it's not, it almost needs, if it's not the defense that dominates every opponent, like you need some third receiver to like figure it out or emerge that becomes, like, even for just a couple of games, an important player for them.
I can definitely see the thought process behind that. I would wonder what if they just really lean into a pretty concentrated target tree between Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, just feed them, and then Pacheco is their functional run game. Like, is that enough for their offense to be like, or will defenses just be able to take that away? Because it's like, okay, let's just double Kelce, we'll double Rice, and then we dare you to throw to MVS. You know, like,
right.
We double dog dare you to throw to MVS.
That makes sense. And by the way, on your comp to Rodgers, so in 2015, Rodgers was the QB9, but then he was QB1 the next year, QB6 the year after that, and I guess Mahomes this year has been QB13. So pretty close.
Yeah, and the reason I remembered Rodgers was QB9 one year was because I think, like, back in early Dak career when he had like a pretty solid start as a fantasy quarterback. I think he was like QB6 his first full season or something, and never outside the top 10, like QB6, 2, 3 or something like that.
Yeah,
I remember getting into a heated argument with someone in my home league about how Dak was basically the same thing as Aaron Rodgers for fantasy football. And I cited the Aaron Rodgers finishing as QB9. So it's funny, the stupid stuff that your brain remembers, but I did remember that about Aaron Rodgers fantasy finishes.
And I guess on the concentrated, this to me, this is a crazy stat. Rashee Rice, like, regardless if it not target per run, not none of the route participation stuff, just flat out target share over week 12 through week 17 was at 27%. So I guess to me that is like it in terms of Rice, it's been pretty concentrated. So what you're really saying, because I know it hasn't been concentrated to Kelce, what you're really saying is Kelce sort of emerges, and then those two can be complementary to each other, and that is what sort of sparks it.
Yeah, I think that's really the way to play the Chiefs, is that it's the return of Kelce. And then I do believe that you probably should play it both ways, where the Chiefs are successful, and they're either successful, A, because Kelce comes back and he's much more of himself, and then the Chiefs are successful because Rice has emerged and now they have Kelce and their defense is great, right? And they have Pat Mahomes, who's, you know, one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the league right now, right?
Right.
And then the other outcome is Kelce is more of a shadow of himself, but he's still able to contribute in some meaningful ways to the team. Maybe not as great for you for fantasy, but then you do what you were talking about of betting on one of these other guys to emerge. Betting, you know, like, God, I hate that I'm blowing this guy up now, and I've heard other people start talking about him. Pretty sad.
You've blown him up so much, I know who you're going to say.
Yeah, it's Richie James, because, you know, we've seen Richie James do this at other places too. Like, he, you know, at the Giants is like, oh yeah, Richie James is like one of our most competent receivers. We can throw this guy the ball. And you're just dealing with not a lot of target competition there in Kansas City. It's like Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and no one else. And so to think that Richie James could get 15 to 18% target share doesn't seem like that far of a stretch for me. And he's free in these playoff best ball drafts. And so if you're building a Kansas City goes to the Super Bowl type team, Richie James feels like such a strong bet to me to have on it, because you're saying like, it's almost just like you said, it's almost necessary for someone to emerge and do something for this team. And so that's why I really like the Richie James bet for the Chiefs. I think we also should shift gears to the team that's become the most accessible to get. They just slide all the time in playoff best ball now, and that's the Eagles. Now, my big Eagles fade is feeling fantastic right now, but I have to tell you that the thesis behind my Eagles fade was more that Jalen Hurts had a legitimate long-term injury that they haven't fully disclosed to us yet. Like that knee injury was actually more serious than we've been, made aware of. But I got to tell you, the last couple of weeks, he looks a lot more like his old self. He's running and like getting up to speed, and like he's not making violent cuts or anything, but that never was really part of his game. When he's running, he's more of like a power runner, if anything.
The guy squats 600 pounds.
Yeah. But like the last couple of Eagles games, I'm like, ooh, shit, my thesis might not be right, because that looks like a healthy guy. So
I've seen some tweets that essentially the Eagles' offensive efficiency in the last couple of games has been very, very good. They've blown up the scoreboard, but their defense has been awful. Their defense has been shipping points. And that's why they keep losing games. And they had fired their defensive coordinator. They decided Matt Patricia was going to be the solution. And that just sort of made it worse. So that's one where I think like if the Eagles make it to the Super Bowl, like you know that their offense if you're basing off the last couple of weeks, their offense has likely been very, very strong, very efficient, and putting up points. It's like what I think almost what you need to happen is their defense to improve. Their defense to figure out how do we get our linebackers to cover all these 49er players and so forth.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. The Eagles' offense has looked way more functional. And prior to the last couple of games, their offense was looking pretty dysfunctional, which was part of why the fade felt so good to me. It was like, what does this team have going for it? Their offense is broken now. Their defense is broken. And so now it feels like the offense is starting to get back on track a little bit. For me, I still have a pretty healthy fade on the Eagles because of the volume of teams that I've drafted. I will never be able to get to a place that is neutral on the Eagles. And honestly, like even still, I'm not finding my way to them very often because their path is most likely through the 49ers, which just feels really thin to me. But I've got to I want to be honest and say like prior to this last week, and I know that they lost to the Cardinals and that's why they're dropping and everyone feels way worse about the Eagles. But I'll tell you, because my thesis was so based in Jalen Hurts' injury and he doesn't look injured to me anymore, or at least like he's way closer to full strength.
A key plank of your thesis is
it's crumbling in front of my eyes, and so I'm way more scared about my fade than I was. I was like ready to take that to the bank, before I saw him play in Arizona, and now I'm like, oh shit, I might have got out over my skis a little bit, like on estimating the severity of that injury, and so I think that I might get bailed out on the fade because they dropped the game and they're going to have to go through the 49ers. But gosh, I do think that if you have a big Eagles fade like I do, you might be interested in mixing some of them in at cheap prices, especially in the gauntlet where you get an advantage on your opponents who have all these, AJ
Mhm.
Brown, you can get in the second. You can get AJ Brown in the late second, sometimes 2-3 turn, in gauntlet drafts right now. And everyone else has him in like, the mid first. So, or the first 50% of the contest has him in the mid first. And so that's such a large advantage, in my opinion, that I'm going to be looking to do that in those rooms where I'm in a structure where it makes sense to utilize Eagles, maybe as an advance rate piece or something or other like that. I'll be looking to take advantage of those sliding prices in the gauntlet, even though I've got a pretty heavy Eagles fade. So
that makes sense. And so I'm going to use this chart to ask you a question that I know you've been fielding quite a bit. Rashad White. And just to highlight one more time, this chart is only the last 4 weeks, the average of the last 4 weeks. Rashad White is somebody who you've been sort of excited about all season, especially relative to market sentiment and given his price, that he's sort of a bell cow that is useful in the passing game. So he has, even if it's not the pure profile, he has this sort of profile where he's using the run game, he's using the pass game, so he's versatile and can score points. I'm sort of leading the witness here, but what are you doing with a player like Rashad White, who they're not the bottom seed, they likely do make the playoffs, and honestly they're going to project well.
Yeah, the thing that I've been doing with the Bucks in general, because so much of playoff best ball it's not a player takes kind of contest, it's a team level. What's the probability that this team makes the conference championship? Really is like the driving factor behind every pick.
5% apparently.
Yeah, and so the Bucks are thin to do that, but for me, I was so light on Bucks, and specifically the combination that I didn't have hardly any of before that I'm willing to do now is I had almost no Bucks Cowboys because it looked almost like a sure thing that the Bucks and Cowboys were going to face each other in round one. Now it looks pretty likely that it's going to be Bucks and Eagles round one. And so the combination that I previously was willing to do, which would have been Eagles Bucks, is now off the menu. I'd never draft that. And now I'm willing to draft Cowboys Bucks. And I do think those are teams like now we can get a little bit into player takes here. But think about the matchups for both of those teams, not just in round one of the playoffs, but into round two of the playoffs. So the Cowboys either get, the Rams or the Packers in week one at home. Cowboys are averaging 40 points a game at home. Those are some pieces you might want to have in playoff basketball. Even if you don't think the Cowboys are going to the Super Bowl, the path to the conference championship game is about as clean as it can be, So they feel really good for that, just in like a raw point scoring ability. And you marry that with the probability they make the conference championships. The Cowboys might be some of the best clicks in the tournament. And I'm, as a eternal pessimist Cowboys fan, I don't even think they're making the Super Bowl, and I think they're one of the best clicks in the tournament. And so then when you look at the Bucks, it's the Bucks.
Are you okay with me showing this, by the way?
Showing what?
I didn't. This.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, when you look at the Bucks playing the Eagles, who we just talked about, their defense has been a sieve. So you're telling me I can combine Cowboys Bucks, who are going to be two of the offenses in the best situation to put up lots of points in round one. And I'm always really aggressive with my teams. I'm building them with lots of Ravens. I'm building them, sometimes with 49ers. Obviously, you can't do a Dallas and Tampa Bay combo with 49ers unless you're doing something with 5 bye week players, and then you're willing to punt off, 1 or 2 players that are just going to be dead in round two for you. But we won't get too much into the game theory aspect of it there. But to circle back to your Rashad White question, yes, I'm drafting Rashad White. Typically, I will not take as much Rashad White as I would Mike Evans because roster construction considerations typically push me towards wanting to take a wide receiver on an underdog team as opposed to a running back on an underdog team. Just the way that I like to construct my rosters for optimizing for the way that I think this contest should be played. But there are going to be times where I'm thin enough at running back that I'm willing to do something like Rachaad White, Mike Evans, skinny stack, get me through the early rounds. If the Bucs win round 1, great. If they win round 2, because the way that I play the game, the Bucs are never my primary stack. If I've advanced to round 3, it's probably because my primary stack with my quarterback is going to the conference championship. And so in the event that I am in the conference championship round and I have my primary stack alive and I have Rachaad White, Mike Evans alive, I bet you I'm like 70+% to advance to the Super Bowl at that point because of the way that I build my teams for the contest. And so, yeah, Mike Evans.
I guess just to ask to sort of dive in here. So Tampa Bay, it says here 69% to make the playoffs.
Nice.
Very nice. 5% to make the conference championship. And I guess the question is roughly speaking, is a 69% chance to make the playoffs, is that enough for us to be drafting them now prior to this weekend when there's outcomes where they don't make it, or next week you'll just know who's in the playoffs?
Right. They're right on, them and Jacksonville are right on the threshold for me of like, it's okay to take them there, but you shouldn't be starting your draft with the plan of, I'm going to go Mike Evans and Rachaad White, and those are my advance rate pieces. Like, that's what happens. That's what you do when you get forced into that path of the game tree. Like, this is the thing that makes the most sense for me. I already have Dallas, so I
built my Dallas stack, and let's say I have a stack on the other side where the QB is already gone. Oh shit! Somebody just took my somebody just took what's Dak Prescott. Now I got to figure out a quarterback stack. Okay, who's there? Trevor Lawrence, and Jacksonville. I don't know. You're probably not doing Baker Mayfield and Tampa Bay.
I probably, as far as like the grossest solo quarterback that I'll do for like this team could make a run, like Matt Stafford, Joe Flacco, those ones are like, because you see their odds of conference championship is 15% for Stafford and 22% for Flacco. That's high enough for me, like in the outcomes where that plays out, like I'm cooking. But yeah, I wouldn't do Baker. Like my break glass in case of emergency wouldn't be, oh, I'm taking Baker Mayfield and it's Bucks all the way, baby. It would more so be like, I've got 5 players on bye, and I'm literally my round 1 player that's hitting my lineup right now is like Tony Pollard and Brandon Cooks. And then I'm like staring down who are my last 3 players going to be to fill out my starting roster. It's like, oh,
it's not going to be the third string tight end for the Ravens.
Or
something like that.
Yeah, I at that point then I'm like, well, it's gross. It probably doesn't work the vast majority of the time, but it's logical. It keeps me within structure. And when I win playing the game this way, I win a disproportionate amount of money compared to playing it in the less optimal fashion. So,
okay, that makes sense. I'm going to go back to our
regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah, just I thought it made sense to show that in the context of the conversation.
It's okay to be proud of that infographic, Drico. I
I spent a lot of time working on it. I'm really proud of it.
Dude, I've sent it around to a bunch of people. I've been like, look at this cool thing Drico whipped up. I think it's like really intuitive way to look at all the conference championship odds. It's nice and neat. Shows all the playoff stuff. So it's good, man.
Thank you. And then I think Kyron Williams, he's another example of a player like Rachaad White, but he feels a lot better. He's obviously much more expensive than Rachaad White, but it feels better given that your conference championship odds are 15%, and he's playing well, and the Rams' offensive have been notably better, or it seems to me anyway, notably better than the Bucs. That feels like an emotional take, but I think it's right too.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And the hard part about the Rams for me is like, I really like them to help me get bye week heavy teams through. but I don't really want them when I have San Francisco,
Right.
because they're going to see San Francisco in round 2 pretty much no matter what
Right.
happens.
Right.
Barring-
If you're taking if you have a 1-seed stack, you cannot take the 6 or 7.
Right.
Just those are just no.
You're betting. Yeah, you're betting on something that's way too thin, in my opinion. And so then it's like, all right, so now I'm pigeonholed into when I have Lamar and Ravens stacks, that's when I can do the Rams
Right.
stuff. And the fickle thing about playoff best ball is like a lot of times you'd be in a room where doing the Lamar and Ravens build, everything falls beautifully and you're able to go like Kyron and Puka, and you're like, sick. This is a powerhouse here. I'm going to be able to advance this thing. And then you're in another room where everything goes off basically the exact same. You got the Lamar setup. You're looking good for your Super Bowl matchup. You're feeling strong about it. You know, maybe your Cowboys and Ravens. And then all of a sudden it's like, and Kyron Williams just got taken at pick 26. Fuck me. Like,
right.
You're like, this great plan I had is now unavailable. And for me, that's how I want most of my Rams exposure to come, is through my Baltimore builds. And God, it's so funny.
I do think that one of the hardest things about playoff best ball is the pivots. When you get turned away, your range of acceptable options are much narrower. So figuring out a pivot under time pressure it's a skill you have to build, and it's the most difficult thing, I think. But you have to do it.
One of the biggest flaws I see, even good people that are like sharp drafters, good best ball players overall, might not be the best playoff best ball players, but one mistake I see people make all the time is they'll get blown up on what they want to do as plan A, and they'll say, forget everyone in this room, I'm going to nuke this draft and I'm just going to worry about advancing and min cashing. And
I thought you were describing me for a second, but like, that's awful. Like that, you should just go to the casino.
Yeah, the trying to min cash thing is like, if you've ever, like, now I'm telling you, so like, don't feel bad about it. Like, just don't do it anymore. But if after you've heard this, you're like, I'm just gonna try and min cash, like, that is the stone worst thing you can do. Like, and you don't even have to take my word for it. Like, just go do the expected value math on the tournament. In fact, let me just here. I put this together because I was having this conversation with someone in a Discord channel. And
send me the screenshot and I'll throw it up if you want.
Here, I'm sharing this. And are we zoomed? Let's zoom a little bit here.
How do I?
There we go. Okay, so this is just like over here we have prize structure and all that stuff. But what I did here is you've got your base advance rate. So this is purely just the probabilities of advancing based on the structure. So 2 of 6, 2 of 14, 1 of 8.
Right, you're neutral.
Right. This is for the gauntlet. And then I have adjusted advance rate, and I just put this together to show as a thought experiment for like the min cash bros, why it's so bad. And so for people that have followed some of the playoff best ball content we've put out about how large an advantage you can have in round 3, where like you can quite literally get to 100% advance rate in your round 3 pods if you're playing the game correctly. And so like this 45% adjusted advance rate, in my opinion, is like, that's probably like your worst case scenario for the teams that things go well for, that you actually, get here. And I've got your adjusted advance rate out of round 1 all the way down at 10%, which is like that would be like pretty close to what your
only your very best teams are getting true.
Yeah, that would be like what your advance rate would be, taking a 0 at quarterback every week. So like, even if you do something like say 15%, so you're like, I'm less than half neutral advance rate. Like when you look at the expected value difference, and we can even drop this a little and say instead of 45, we're at only 0.4. It's like, you look at the EV, and this is for max entering both of these, you're like dominating. You're like $1,000 more EV playing the contest through optimizing for the later rounds and not worrying about your min cash. Like, you can nuke this round 1 rate all the way into the ground, like literally only having 4 active players, and you'll still be plus EV if you're
just for
optimizing
a
the way around.
demonstration, what if you put in 5% and 20%?
Ooh, 5% in round 1.
Yeah.
Oh God, I mean, I don't even think that's possible without like.
I don't think it's
scrolling.
possible either.
And then 20.
Okay. So 15 from 15 to 5 is like okay. So,
yeah.
Okay, so that that's 1/6 of the base rate. Sorry.
Yeah, you'd have to. I mean, because last year 5% of teams advanced or would have advanced taking a 0 at quarterback, like literal 0 points, and that was
Right.
1 of 6. So like 10% feels extremely low to me for
Right.
advanced. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, 15. If you're out here building aggressive teams where you're like, I'm building 5 bye week players and only 5 active, then you might be somewhere between 10 to 15% advance rate. But you honestly
Right.
could be higher than that.
It's the equivalent of 8% advance rate in normal best ball.
Yeah, which is just like you can't really do like if you looked at Easy's BBM sheet that he had in the Deposit Kingdom, like even the worst people were like not at 8%, you know, like
right.
You could like, and look at this, even if you only have 30% advance rate from the finals round, which like I promise you, if you play this contest the correct way of optimizing for the conference championship round, like you are going to turn the cards over and have like however many teams you got to the finals, you're going to be like, I'm advancing all of these, but maybe 2, you know, like it's
Right.
going to be real good. Yeah, it's just so much of the EV is in that round, you know, like getting into the finals is all the EV. And so optimizing for the round where you can, like, you literally can get yourself to 100% here. And it's not like oh, that happens once in a blue moon. It's like, if you build the way I'm telling you to build, you could get this to 100%,
Right.
you know, on a chunk of your rosters.
And you're only what you call it. You're only quote unquote only. It's not like this is that extreme. You're probably what 2.5x the base rate, and the logic there is that most people who are building teams, they're drafting teams with 5 or 6 like different drafted teams, or maybe even 7. And so by the time they get to the conference championship, they have like 2 players left, 3 players left. And if you're building to have 6 or 7, and most people have 2 or 3, am I in the range there?
You're nailing it. And I'll show you. I first built this sheet out to try and like give myself some target thresholds for how I wanted my portfolio to be constructed. And I'll tell you my goal and how I initially built this sheet was that I was going to aim for something like this. Because I think 20% advance rate out of round 1 is very attainable. I think I have a pretty substantial edge on the field already by round 2. Because there's lots of people that are doing like, oh, I took Dallas and I took the Rams, or I took, you know, Miami and Kansas City. And it's like, those guys play each other round 1. Not for sure yet, you know, but after week 18, we'll know. But it's like, yeah, those guys play each other round 1, bud. So you just nuked a bunch of your equity.
The other thing is what, like, even people who are drafting straight up, they're stocking teams. They're not thinking about the round 2 at all.
Right. And so, yeah, I felt like this was a pretty reasonable assessment of like, I'm going to be punting a little bit in round 1. I'm going to be much better than the field in round 2. And I should be able to pretty healthily dominate the field in round 3. But even if things don't go great for me, like when you kind of break down the math like this, you'll see why, like, and I apologize if when I explain this stuff, like if I'm going over the same stuff over and over to people in the Discord, like if I come across as a little frustrated, it's because I've spent so much time on this that like I know what the right answer is. And so when I'm like explaining it, it's easy. It's just human nature to get frustrated on something where like, you know, the right answer and someone's like, but it's not that. And you're like, no, dude, like it's this and it's this for like 20 different reasons. Like it's not just this expected value calculation I'm showing you here. It's like all this other stuff that I've looked into as well. But anyway, I wanted to share this because I think that this format is, you know, probably the very largest edge that we have in these games. And so like if you spend the time to, you know, put in some effort and learn how to play the format optimally, I bet you still got a solid 2 years, 3 years before the format is like much sharper and harder to beat. I think it'll get progressively sharper year over year because idiots like me are telling everyone what to do and ruining the edge. But like, dude, when you think of the overall reach that, you know, content like this has compared to the field, like the field's still going to be bad for a couple years. So if you like playing best ball and drafting teams and you want it to be a profitable venture, like I'll tell you, I went extremely high risk last season and had 0 KC Philly matchups. Like almost, I think I might have had a couple in my portfolio that I built, but next to 0, and I still profited. Like it's just like I made teams to the finals, so I profited. You know.
I know we sort of covered that it's not a player take contest, but I think it is still interesting. I guess it's interesting to me that even over the last 4 games, we sort of called it when David Montgomery was coming back from injury that Jahmyr Gibbs has played well enough to still be the starter. And it's sort of nuts to me that he is still the starter. And they're sort of treated like 1A, 1B in drafts. And they sort of are a little bit, but at the same time, they're also sort of not. Like if we're looking at this data and Jahmyr Gibbs is on the field 60% of the time, like similar amount of time as Javonte and James Conner, like, and that to me that's like, you know, maybe I need to before I looked at this chart, my gut feeling was like, okay, I want to play a good bit of David Montgomery just because, like, I feel like variance is going to return him back in my favor. But Gibbs is the starter.
Yeah, one thing I want to look at, would you mind going to the backup chart so we can see David Montgomery? The thing that I'm looking at here is I want to look at their pass blocking snaps for each of them. And so, yeah, so here, if you look at now, the bar looks smaller because Montgomery's out there for less, but I'm curious as to the
just under 40% is his productive.
Okay.
And Gibbs is somewhere. Oh, okay, you're right. Gibbs is somewhere out there, like his like fantasy productive. So rushes plus routes is 50%, and his actual total rushes is 20, and then Montgomery is a little over 20. So yeah, you're right.
They're close,
Gibbs,
but I agree with you that like Gibbs is the one you want to own in these fantasy contests,
right?
for
Given
playoffs.
that they're so close in price.
The spot that I would say you want Montgomery is when you're playing Lions to the Super Bowl, because then you're getting some positive game scripts in there, and you know that Montgomery is the guy they like to salt the game away with. Like that's their big power, establish the run type back, where Dan Campbell wants to bite kneecaps off and run it down their throat. So we can go back to the starter chart now, and then also, if you wanted to share our smiling faces with the audience, I'm sure they're missing them here. We are hidden.
I'm just a StreamYard amateur.
That's okay.
Best, but I appreciate you calling that out.
I was spending all that off camera time picking my nose and doing things like that, so that was great. But yeah, as far as other backs that I think are interesting, you know, as we head into the playoff contest type season, if the Colts make Jonathan Taylor's kind of interesting. You know, in playoff best ball, he'll be a last round guy still, you know, maybe 9th round, but you'll get him for free. And the thing that I really like about this, the AFC, is you can end up with either the Colts or the Texans playing the Bills. And I know that the Bills have been hotter lately. You know, they kicked the shit out of the Cowboys. They beat the Chiefs. Like, you know, they're running hot. They barely beat the Easton Stick-led Chargers, though. Like,
right.
I'm not.
They're not a juggernaut.
No, I'm not as convinced as everyone else that the like tagline that you'll hear around the Bills is they might not have the best playoff probability, but we know they can make a run if they get in there. And to that, I'm like, really? Do we know that they can make a run? Like, and they could.
I mean, to be fair, their conference championship odds are 27%, which is that's pretty high.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. They absolutely, like, all of the odds say that they can make a run. They're basically, the thing is, in the AFC, it's like there's the Ravens, and then it's like a 4-horse race. It's like the Browns, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Dolphins are all close enough that it's like it's pick your winner, you know? And so for me, I kind of like the Bills as a potential upset spot. I really don't think the Colts have the ability to upset them. Like, I want to put a little respect on the Bills' name there, but like, you're telling me that if the Texans go into Buffalo and CJ Stroud, you know, top 5 quarterback in the league now, better than Josh Allen. That's just in there to tilt Liam. But CJ Stroud goes into Buffalo. You don't think they have like a snowball's chance in hell of an upset? Because that's a spot that I kind of like.
The Colts upset them last year, didn't they? In regular season, I remember it was a week where Jonathan Taylor was like $10,000 on, or was that the year before? Yeah, it was the. Sorry,
I think that's got to be the year before.
It was the year before, and it was the one where the Colts weren't actually that good, and the Bills were like they had their championship squad together, and the Colts upset them just because they couldn't stop JT.
Yeah, and I could definitely see, you know, I just think all of the, really, this is more like a broad AFC thing rather than, I'm not just trying to pick on the Bills. I just think every team in the AFC outside the Ravens really have quite a few warts on them, right? Like, yeah. And so I think that for me, the way that I play the AFC is, especially now while the playoff like seeding is still a little ambiguous, is that the upsets will be more likely to come on the AFC side than they would be to come on the NFC side. So then I'm willing, you know, like, for example, you could very reasonably have a 6 and 7 team both win on the AFC because that's, you know, Dolphins or Bills are going to be the 6. And then the 7 is going to be, you know, Houston or Indy, most likely, maybe Pittsburgh in some outcomes, in which case, like, good luck on getting an upset. But, you know, it's, to me, it's not that outside the realm of possibility to say Dolphins upset the Chiefs, Texans upset the Bills, and all of a sudden you're looking at like, okay, I actually could have taken, you know, the 6 seed Dolphins and planned on them not running into the Ravens in round 2 because I played it like the Texans were going to upset the Bills. So I'm willing to do that on the NFC more than I'm willing to do it, or willing to do that on the AFC more than I'm willing to do it on the NFC. Now, it's not to say that the Cowboys are some unbeatable force. Like, it would be the most Cowboys thing of all time for them to lose at home in embarrassing fashion in week 1 of the playoffs. But I think that that's way more likely if they run into the Rams, who would need to win this weekend and maintain their seeding, versus the Packers, or win this weekend and get the seeding, versus the Packers, who, you know, if the Packers beat the Bears and the Rams lose, then now the Packers move up to the 6th seed and the Rams are down to the 7th seed and face the Cowboys. So that's just one thing where I'm considering, where I'm like, Cowboys probably don't get upset by the Packers, but like getting upset by the Rams is definitely in the range of outcomes. So I think another way to mix Rams in, like if you're like me and you're kind of underweight Rams because you're waiting for playoff odds to consolidate, a good way to do it is when you fade Cowboys, you could do some Rams, you know, because I think they're probably, someone in the leg up Discord is pointing out that right now the probability, if you pull up your playoff odds sheet, it's got, actually, I don't think that it's got the seeding. Oh yeah, it does. It has seeding on there. It has Rams right now as 91% to maintain their seed. But I believe that Spike Week ran their simulations for that with the scores and odds that they source from Scores and Odds prior to all of the news of the 49ers and Rams resting players. And so they didn't have, you know, the new lines that are considering the fact that it's now Carson Wentz starting at quarterback versus Sam Darnold and, you know, the island of misfit toys playing in that game. So I do believe that those odds probably move a little bit down from Rams being 91% to maintain that seed. So that's just some food for thought there.
So we can. So the spread right now is 3.5, minus 3.5, 49ers.
Yeah, and I'll pull up what I was seeing here.
So they open as 4.5, and I think
So this user in the Leg Up Discord shared, I want to say that this was from Circa. He shared that if you parlayed 49ers money line and Packers money line, which is what you would need to have happen, right, for the seeding to change, that's plus 145. So happens like 40% of the time, according to the odds currently on Circa. So I would just say, you know, that 91% probability for the Rams to face Detroit here is probably closer to like 60%. The other thing is, I think that...
And so, where is it? Tell me if I need to switch off this. No, this is publicly available.
Yep.
So, 91 and 9. So, they actually they're giving them 0% chance to be anything but the 6 or 7 seed,
because that's how it would play out. They can't be anything other because of the tiebreakers. I believe that Green Bay holds tiebreaker over the Rams and holds tiebreaker over New Orleans.
So then what? So then the Rams could feasibly be the 7 seed. Is that what
okay. Very, very feasibly. This user, the plus 145, implying about 40% implied odds of that. For me, that's probably a little high, because I think that's assuming they've got the 49ers at like minus 200. And that's like for money line, which to me doesn't seem right in a game of backups. I think you're probably much closer to
okay, gotcha.
And so for me, the way I've kind of been drafting around it is like, sure, it's not 91% anymore, but it's also not as bad as 60%. You're probably somewhere in like the 70 to 80% range that LA holds on to that 6th seed. Because you're also, you know, it's not like Green Bay's been a powerhouse. They still got to beat the Bears, you know? So anyway, that's important for people to note, especially if you're using our tool over on Leg Up and you see that 91%. I just want you to know, like, hey, the way, you know, where we're sourcing those odds from, I think ran that earlier this week before all this news, and they'll probably rerun it. So that should get updated. But like, if you are drafting right now while you're listening to this and it's still 91%, just be willing to IKB it a little bit and have a little bit more uncertainty there with how you're doing it.
They've changed it to 90%.
Okay. Yeah. So I would assume, just my understanding of the way that their simulations are pulling data, that the scores and odds data that they're grabbing from that is not current with the money lines. But I bet you it'll probably be updated like tomorrow or something. So
that makes sense. Thanks for joining us, Hope.
Yeah, happy to see Hope in the chat, delivering all these fantastic playoff contests to us. Also, shout out to Hope for like one of the best quality of life changes I've seen on Underdog, of showing the advance rate structure on the little tournament card. When you open up a tournament now, like if you open up the Mitten 3, it says 1 of 6 advanced to round 2, which so nice to not have to click into the rules and read through like, okay, what is it to advance each round?
Yeah.
Kudos.
That's a big change.
Good stuff, Hope. Yeah, super happy. Underdog hiring Hope and Numi was like one of the things that gave me the largest boost of confidence in the platform. Honestly, it's like, all right, I know that Hope and Numi know like what would be good
the player experience.
Yeah, so that was cool. Thank you, Hope.
So is there anywhere? What are we missing here with DeAndre Swift down here at just over just a tad under 50% snap share?
you may want to pull up the chart while we talk about it.
Oh yeah, you're right.
You're
That's
fine.
awesome.
We've been bouncing around. I'm like giving you difficult hosting duty here. So I
Not
know
difficult. I just suck.
so Swift had a little bit of he had some injury stuff. I want to say a couple weeks ago. You got a higher Kenneth Gainwell game, didn't we? Where Gainwell got more of the snaps. And you can actually see that on Gainwell here. He's like now slightly above 40%. And so I think that's part of it. But man, the like if we want to kind of get into the knowing ball film grinder stuff, I think that the Lions' concerns around DeAndre Swift of like he's never healthy, he's not available, might be more true than I gave them credit for. Where I just thought the Lions are a boomer org and they are making these dumb like football guy type decisions where they're ignoring the talent of this player because he had some bad injury luck. But as Swift's efficiency has kind of waned and his explosiveness has waned, and we're seeing his snaps and usage go down here, it seems like there might have been something to what the Lions were kind of implying about Swift, where this guy just can't really carry like a full workload in the NFL and still be the best version of himself. It's not like I think he's a great player. Like he's an awesome running back. He's super electric and explosive when he's himself, but he hasn't looked like himself in these last few weeks. So who knows? Maybe it's a thing where he's getting better from it. Maybe, but we're at the end of a pretty long grind of a season for these guys. So the fresh legs thing is kind of a meme, but there's also definitely some truth to it. So. I think that might be what we're seeing with Swift, and he's a guy.
It's definitely a concern given Swift's price and that he's going alongside some like definitely starting running backs.
I'll say he falls a ton now. I won't be surprised. The thing about the Underdog ADP updating is it is rather slow, and it's got a lot of the historical components.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, he's kind of anchored where he was. Like it took a long time for Jerick McKinnon to drop down to becoming like nearly undrafted after he went on IR. So I would say by the time the contest closes, you'll see Swift in a more appropriate range. And I bet you that he lands somewhere right below Gus Edwards would be my guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for sure. I think we've sort of covered everyone on this chart. That's
let's get to the efficiency charts because there's a few other takeaways we can have here. Number one is that everyone who was drafting Breece Hall was the most fucking right you could possibly be because this is the best player in the NFL. Like this guy is so good. There's one other running back that's close to Breece Hall, and his name's Christian McCaffrey, but Breece Hall is that dude. I'm going to ruin the price right now. It's Breece Hall 101 for me next season. If you're not on board, I'll see you when I got my 100% Breece Hall exposure. But no, I needed to victory lap Breece Hall once more. And the fact that he was like a guy that you kind of needed in the playoffs felt pretty good too.
Right.
Wish I could have won some more money with him. That would have been even cooler. But what's better than winning money, Draco, is being right. So that was fun. But
I had the same experience. I think that is interesting though. You're honestly Breece Hall over CMC next year?
I don't think I'll need to be, no, you won't. The market will force me to be. So no, I won't be. But if you're asking me legitimately, like if you're saying be 100% honest to me, gun to your head, you have to tell the truth. Who do you think is the better player at playing running back in the NFL? I bet you dollars to donuts. You put Breece Hall in the 49ers offense, he's 200 scrimmage yards every single game. And it's
probably
no doubt, that guy's a monster. CMC's, and it's not to take anything away from CMC. That guy's generational talent, immediate Hall of Famer, absolute all-time GOAT, up there with LaDainian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk, level of incredible running back.
So could it be then CMC 101, Breece Hall 102?
I don't think it'll go that way. I think you got a lot of vividness from some of these wide receivers, going off where I think you're going to get, CeeDee Lamb, and I don't think you're going to be able to get Justin Jefferson out of the top 5.
No, you won't. You won't. You're right.
So I think you got CeeDee Lamb is like made himself a place in the top 5 with the way that he finished the season, which is a huge bummer to me. I was like, God, could you just dud week 17 so I can have you at affordable prices next season? But yeah, I think if we're looking next season, it's probably CMC 101. Probably like I think what we'll have this next year though is less of a because this year it felt really like it's always Jefferson 101, it's always Chase 102, and it's almost always CMC 103, right? I think we'll have a lot more variability in the guys that are in that first tier. But I think that top 6 is going to be something like CMC, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. You still probably get Jamar Chase up there. And then, in my opinion, you probably should have Garrett Wilson in there too if the Jets are looking like they'll have a quarterback because of how. But
shout out with no quarterback.
Yeah,
I think there's a good chance that this could be a year where like the 22 season where if you the 101 through 106, you feel so good about your first round pick. And then
Tyreek Hill has to be in there, you know.
But 107 and later, I think people might feel pretty like they've lost out because that top 6 is so good.
I agree that that early tier. Now the fun part is going to be, you know, that back half of the first round. I mean, just like we saw this year, that's where like all the
money
stuff came from. Yeah, that's where the money was. And to me, that kind of feels like that's going to be the case again, because it's when you have a tier of players that everyone's so confident it should be priced above them. Like they're usually right. The market's pretty good at that. And then every next tier that you go down, like the uncertainty increases. And when you get uncertainty surrounding pricing players that are still really, really good fantasy assets, getting the correct ones of that bunch can be the thing where it's like, yeah, I just won all the money because I went CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, you know?
Right.
But to take it back to stuff that can be useful to people, maybe in FFPC contests or playoff best ball, we do see some guys that are in this elite category. I got an interesting one for you. Packers make the playoff, let's say.
Okay.
What are we doing with Aaron Jones here, who's in this 20 expected fantasy points category?
That is interesting. He sort of pops as the you've stacked a bunch of Ravens. You're worried about your having enough players to advance out of round 1. Aaron Jones is free there. That feels like the appropriate thing where I don't feel any confidence that the Packers make a run in the playoffs. But like come the playoffs, if they're in the round 1, any of the let's rest Aaron Jones because he's old or whatever, that goes out the window. It's like we really need to win this game. You're getting a lot of snaps. You're playing.
I kind of want to look at Aaron Jones through the lens of the FFPC playoff challenge, because I know that you have some really good insights there as well. So let's just say that it ends up being, let's do Packers and we'll say it stays Packers Cowboys like it is right now, right? So it's Packers Cowboys. How are you playing the Packers? Are you full fade? Are you soft fade? Or would you do, I mean, what other options do you think are viable here?
So, so we're shifting to the FFPC playoff tournament. And for context, you have to play 14 players, and 2 of them are kickers. Or say one of them is a kicker, one of them is a defense. So they're considered soft fade, and then 2 teams you have to select and that you are not picking a player from. And generally speaking, the team you soft fade and hard fade, they're the ones that you're picking not to advance onto the second round. And so assuming that the Packers play the Cowboys, and damn you for making me say this, The Cowboys would be pretty heavy favorites over the Packers. And so it would be extremely contrarian to pick a Packers skill position player to in this contest, because then almost by design you are you're almost forced to at least soft fade the Cowboys, where you're taking their kicker or something like that. Just with how the bracket is set up, just how you just have to make those choices. And I mean, if you want to go down narrative street where the Cowboys are sort of perennial disappointments, and this year will be no different, then you do something. You probably do something like Aaron Jones, or if he's back for the playoffs in time, Jaden Reed. And with the Packers, if you are picking a skill position player, you don't have to go down the depth chart at all. You're going to be so contrarian picking a skill position player for them, that you can pick their best players.
Yeah, I think the reason that it was interesting to me, and I wanted your opinion on it, was I thought of that as one of the, because like you said, in this FFPC playoff contest, getting weird or like finding leverage doesn't have to come from like how you would typically think about it in a DFS contest where you're playing pure dart throws. You're playing like the best player just on a team that's unlikely to win, or you're playing the second best player on a team. And so, for example, the Cowboys will probably, like, people that play the Cowboys in this tournament, the vast majority are going to play him through CeeDee Lamb. You're going to have like 70,
no doubt.
80, 90% ownership on CeeDee Lamb. And so by soft or hard fading the Cowboys and playing someone like Aaron Jones or Jaden Reed, that affords you the luxury of playing all chalk everywhere else, right? Like you can jam CMC, Lamar Jackson. You play the best team, play the best plays. And the thing that's attractive about that is you really only have to get that one contrarian thing right. And then if everything else goes, according to the probabilities, you win all the money. And so those are really interesting plays in that contest. And so with Aaron Jones kind of popping on this chart, he felt like he fit in the discussion for that.
Right. And I think, you tell me if you disagree with me, I think in the context of that tournament, it's not like you have 3 teams and then 2 of them are Aaron Jones teams. It's like you have 20 teams and one of them is an Aaron Jones team.
Yeah.
And then you're doing all the best plays everywhere else.
Yes. Yeah. I've definitely thought about that as like, give me one. Prior to making these charts, I was like, God, I love Jaden Reed. Like, it'd be so fun to play a Jaden Reed team in the FFPC challenge. And then now seeing Aaron Jones with the Jaden Reed injury, it's like, maybe I just play it through Aaron Jones. But like, to be perfectly transparent, I don't even know if I'll get there. Like, I don't know if I'll have the stones to do a
that is such a contrarian play. But you can make a great team that has very plus EV with Aaron Jones. Right.
Anyway, yeah, I thought he was interesting. On this chart, we already covered David Montgomery a little bit. You know what? I think we do have both Justice Hill and Gus Edwards on this chart, though, who are now kind of, they're, 2 ships passing in the night here. We see Justice Hill's expected fantasy points increasing from where he had been, and Gus Edwards is starting to come down a little bit. Part of this is just variance in Gus Edwards not getting goal line touches, right? That when Gus Edwards gets a goal line touch, like everybody remembers Gus Edwards, King Vulture for a couple weeks, where he's like getting 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns. Like, when that's happening, his rushing expected fantasy points shoots way up. He just has been running a little cold on touchdowns. So we're almost to, we're not there yet, but we're getting closer to a Gus Edwards Justice Hill flippening in the ADP in playoff best ball. And so, right now Gus Edwards goes, probably in like the late 20s, early 30s most of the time, but he's sliding more. because Justice Hill just had a really big game and people have recency bias. So I'm curious. It's gotten harder for me to be able to fit both of them on a team together. Just with the way that the ADPs have shaken out, some of the stronger round one active running backs that you have are harder to get in these Ravens type builds that you'd want to have. I think Kyron is your best example, and it can be hard to get Kyron, Justice, and Gus Edwards along with some of the other pieces that you'd really want to have there. So I guess I'm just wondering, how would you be prioritizing these running backs? Do you have a strong preference one towards the other? Are you kind of treating them as, I just need one of these two guys, so I'll wait until one's off the board and I'll take the other at the cheaper price? What do you think you should be doing regarding playing Ravens running back in, I think most of the time, I guess you could be mixing them in builds where you don't have Lamar, where you're still playing Ravens to the Super Bowl, but how do you think it's best to play these guys?
I mean, the price isn't even close, right? They're sort of pretty close to each other in terms of usage and maybe not that close. They're, I guess, Justice Hill is there at 12 and Gus Edwards is at 15. I think that the price of Justice Hill being that much cheaper, especially with Gus Edwards, when you're playing a Baltimore stack, and let's say you've started Lamar, you've got Zay Flowers, and now you need to use a good chunk of the middle rounds to build out like a sort of like secondary team that's going to help you through round one. I think that, and like I said, Gus Edwards is right in the middle of that range, where Justice Hill is right at the end when you're putting tack-on players to stacks. I do think that Justice Hill is a much better play in that context. But at the same time, it's a split backfield, and so you probably don't want to get too confident one way or another. You do need to figure out ways to play Gus Edwards teams as well, but definitely prefer the Justice Hill side.
Yeah, I agree with you. The way I've been playing it is I just let Gus Edwards fall, and if he free falls far enough, and I'm like,
right,
cool, I got all the stuff I needed to get, and now Gus Edwards is here staring me in the face, and there's like no opportunity cost. The other guys that I want are like, I'm looking at, Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson or David Njoku, as advance rate pieces, or like maybe, the Dallas is one of my Super Bowl sides with the Ravens. Maybe I've got Dallas and 49ers or something. And I'm like, I could take any of these guys. They're all the same. I just need one of these three players. They don't really matter to me who it is. And so now I can take Gus Edwards here at a much cheaper price. And then whichever of these three random dudes that comes back to me that I need to fill my wide receiver spot, I just click them. And so that's kind of the way I've been doing it. I was thinking through how I like to have Gus Edwards with Lamar. And I do really think I prefer having Gus Edwards with Lamar. I would much rather not have Edwards on a team that's, say it's a 49ers build. I'm doing 49ers Ravens and I got Purdy. And so I don't get Lamar, right? I don't want Gus Edwards on that team. And that might sound counterintuitive because you're thinking, oh, well, Sack, if Gus is cooking and eating all these rushing touchdowns up, that might mean less for Lamar. And that's the exact reason why I don't want that, because in that circumstance where that is happening, right, it's easier to advance the Gus Edwards without Lamar stuff. And so it's going to be more popular. Now, granted, in this instance, I'm talking about with San Francisco, so it's 2 bye teams. So don't worry about getting unique there. Getting 5 to the final with 2 bye teams is unique. But in an instance where maybe it's not 49ers, you're Cowboys and Ravens, right? Then I really don't want Gus Edwards, because I want to benefit from that lower advance rate effect potentially of Lamar teams with Gus Edwards maybe faltering a little bit when Gus has a big week and Lamar has an off week. because I'm just trusting the fact that the rest of my roster, my second QB with team stack, with teams that, I have the potential to have 4 teams total live in the conference championships. I'm trusting that roster construction advantage I have on the field so that when it's difficult to get Lamar through to the finals with Gus Edwards, I'm one of the very few people that's able to do it. And again, it's like we're thinking through this game theory stuff where it's like, does that really matter, man? And it's like, yeah, it matters a lot, because then I'm in the finals and it's me and 2 total teams that were able to get Lamar Gus Edwards through, where on the flip side, it can be much easier to do it if you're Dak Prescott Gus Edwards, because Lamar failed in a week where Gus had 3 rushing touchdowns, right? And so then you show up to the finals and you're Dak Prescott Gus Edwards, and it's like, yeah, you and 40 other teams have Dak Prescott Gus Edwards in the finals, which would only be a 10% ownership rate, by the way. And like, just for reference, if you're not, deep in the streets on these, like last year, there were players with above 40% ownership in the finals, because the nature of this contest is ownership condenses a lot because of the small rosters and how teams actually advance through the real life NFL playoff gauntlet combined with the game within a game playoff gauntlet.
Well, the base ownership is 18.
Yeah.
So like 40% is like a little over 2x, which is not that big a deal.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why I care about it that way. And, you don't have to believe me or buy into that being important, but God, I just hope I ship something with the Lamar Gus Edwards combo and it was really hard to advance, because that'd be a fun victory lap. But anyway, I do think that's important. I think it's an edge that you can get if you're thinking through it correctly. So anyway, I thought the Ravens backfield is a pretty important one to talk about, since they're the highest probability team to make the Super Bowl outside the 49ers right now.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And so CMC 101, nothing to talk about there really. Unless, is there any CMC combinations that you're prioritizing over others?
In the gauntlet, you typically have your option right now at the 101. You go CMC, and then the 2-3 turn is your choice of Chiefs or Buffalo. Typically, if you're trying to play it that way, you can deviate and do different stuff from there, but for the most part, your best looking options from that spot are CMC plus a Buffalo stack or CMC plus a Chiefs stack. And I'll tell you, I'm preferring to play it through the Chiefs because, number one, the Chiefs have better probability, so that sounds good. Number two, Buffalo was way cheaper in the gauntlet earlier. And so some of specifically the 49ers and Buffalo combos are the ones that are some of the most nutted. Like when I look back at my old teams and I see like, oh my gosh, I got Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, James Cook, Gabe Davis. And then I also got CMC, Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel, like see you in the finals for all the money if it's Bills 49ers,
Right.
Those are out there, not like a million of them. And it's still a bye week team with the 49ers. And people did have to draft those early in the life cycle of contests when information was, it was more.
Right. They could have also put in some shitty 7 seed that actually didn't make it.
Yeah.
Maybe have Seahawks stacks.
Bijan Robinson, or something like that to help get their CMC through week 1. So I know I did that one time. God bless that CMC team. Sweet angel. But anyway, I'm not really wanting to do the Bills 49ers version because it's like that's a worse version. It's not saying you can't draft CMC plus Bills. You can still do that, but you just want to be thoughtful about how you're doing it. Maybe taking a later leverage piece that when you do show up in the Super Bowl and face all those super teams, you're like, it actually doesn't matter that you have all those crazy pieces, because I have very low Deontay Hardy, who ended up being the guy you needed in the Super Bowl. Or I have, playoff Leonard Fournette, who actually got 2 receiving touchdowns in the Super Bowl, or whatever it is that you do there. But yeah, CMC with the Chiefs, I'm like mad that I was in a room that let this happen. And so like I'm 1/5 guilty for this, but we were in a big mitten team. So not the gauntlet, thankfully, but we were in a big mitten. And, the guy in the one hole gets CMC, proceeds to get the literal entire Chiefs stack. He gets Travis Kelce, Pat Mahomes, Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco all the way down with CMC. It's like, feels like we probably fucked up somewhere in this room letting this guy get that. But yeah, so I've seen someone get it. I've been able to get it myself a few times in the gauntlet, and then I've been able to get it like -1 premium piece a couple times too. I will tell you, here's all the alpha. Here it is. Write it down. The secret tech. You wanna get your full Chief stack through. It's not Mahomes Kelsey at the 2-3 turn with CMC. It's Pacheco and Rice. And the reason for that, and believe me, I've tested all the different versions, and Pacheco and Rice is the one that gives you the best chance of letting the room get it back to you. At first, I thought, man, it's got to be Rice Kelsey, because no one's going to take naked Mahomes with no pass catcher or Mahomes Pacheco. No one's going to do that. I was wrong. People will do that. And so when you take Pacheco, who has gotten steam lately because he had a big game, and you take Rice, who has gotten steam, and then you leave yucky, dusty Kelsey on the board with Mahomes with only that as the option, that's where people let it fall. So I've had success doing it that way. I would recommend, if you're trying to get the CMC plus the full Monty on the Chiefs, you try it with the Pacheco Rice double tap. And the beautiful thing about that is when that fails, when it comes back and it gets blown up and you don't get Mahomes Kelsey, guess what you hit at the 4-5? It's the hard E-break into the Browns, baby. It's just 4 Browns right in a row, and now you're Browns 49ers Super Bowl, and no one can stop you. So, yeah, that's a pretty great one, in my opinion, because when shit goes bad for you, you still end up with a very viable Super Bowl combo with a very strong team around advancing out of round 1. It's like, that's probably like, that's the secret tech right now. So there you go. There's all the alpha.
So, and this is, I'm not sure if I've blown someone else up by doing this. But one thing that I have seen is cheap Mahomes and Kelsey, where I don't get Rice and Pacheco. I've done that, cheap Mahomes and Kelsey, and then tacked on CEH and one of the random pass catchers. That felt like fine to do. Obviously, that's not as good as just getting the full Monty premium, but that felt fine, right? That wasn't like some.
Yeah, no, it's not that taking Mahomes Kelsey is a donkey thing to do after Rice Pacheco are off the board. It depends on the rest of your build with like what's going to be available.
The room is donkeys, so they won't do that.
Yeah. But there are, it's just you can trust that you just want to leave the grossest 2 players on the board in the room's perception, even though it shouldn't be like the Mahomes Kelsey stack is gross. That's just what the market in general feels like right now. But the difficult thing is this is a little bit more art than science. It's different in every room. Like you might be in a room where someone's like the biggest Travis Kelce fan of all time because they love Taylor Swift and they're like, Kelsey's going to be back for the playoffs.
Taylor Swift is in your draft room on Underdog.
Exactly. Yeah. You ever think about that? So anyway, I would love if we got confirmation that Tay is just out here blasting off in big mitten. Tay-Tay's already maxed the big mitten. She's asking Hope and Numi to come out with an even higher stakes contest.
She was like, "Where's the $10,000?"
Yeah, where's this nosebleed stuff, Underdog? Come on. But no, anyway, I do think that's a really I think that's a lot of edge you can get with how you're playing CMC out of the 1 hole.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, what about like an Amon-Ra? Now I know this is not this is definitely big reaches by ADP. Amon-Ra, Gibbs, given that their conference championship odds are like pretty identical to the Bills and Chiefs. Pretty similar to theirs, and like you're getting just as premium pieces.
My biggest problem with that is what happens to your AFC side of the bracket when you do that, because you start CMC and then Amon-Ra and Gibbs, right? And so you're at the 4-5 turn. Your highest probability AFC side then is either the Chiefs total dart throw guys, which is like, that's not great, You're looking at, maybe Dolphins stragglers. You got like a Waddle, a Chan there.
Right. You're playing a 4 or 5 seed, or
you're playing
garbage.
The Ravens. You're playing Ravens dart throws, but then what you end up doing is you're saying I'm sacrificing CMC dies, right, so that my Lions can live, which I don't think it's not the worst, right? Like, but it's also like, God, you got CMC. Like, don't you want to play towards the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's terrible. I just think your viable options in the game tree are limited. And for me, it's mostly limited into Ravens. So then you're Detroit, San Francisco, Ravens, and then you're also boxed for like advancing in round 1. So like the mitten 3, for example,
you must take the Detroit Lions quarterback.
Yes,
because you can't you probably can't. Well, you can't take Purdy, you can't take Lamar, and so, then you're almost the only viable Super Bowl option for you is where CMC is not available, and so you just lost your first round pick, and you might be playing against somebody who, I'm wondering there's not a first round pick there well, you'd be playing against somebody who has Lamar in the first round.
Yeah, you're pigeonholed. What you're pigeonholed into there is you're pigeonholed into either playing it through Lions to the Super Bowl or playing it through Browns or one of the even lower AFC options to Super Bowl, which I got a lot of Browns to the Super Bowl. I hate to tell you, like I'm not terribly proud of it, but the market wasn't efficient on it, so I hammered it.
Right.
But and I don't think that's so bad, but I usually do stuff like that when I get forced into it, and I don't really want to I think if you're building a big portfolio, like you're maxing a bunch of stuff, like for sure that sounds like a sick build to me. I'm like, yeah, I see that being really cool. I want to do that a couple times, but like for the average person who might be only throwing like 10 or 20 bullets in there, that's one where I'm like, just why don't instead you just do, what we talked about earlier and play it CMC through the Chiefs and get yourself a big advantage on the earlier drafters in the contest. So
yeah, makes sense. I think we're okay to move on from this chart, right?
Yeah, let's hit tight ends here.
So tight end a little different in the playoff context. But more, I honestly think tight end is a more interesting conversation in FFPC playoff than it is on underdog, because underdog, like, they get a bunch of the wide receivers, and it's like you're just taking the guy of like the stack that you're building, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I wonder, like, and then what gets interesting to me about the playoff tournament stuff is that some of these tight ends can be stud killers in the way that TJ Hawkinson was, like, him racking up a gazillion targets in that one playoff game last year, just like nuked Justin Jefferson. Now, some of that was because Justin Jefferson was like double covered every play, but that was like the contrarian play that ended up being very successful. Like, I wonder, could George Kittle be a contrarian play? Probably not, because you're expecting the 49ers to play at least 2 games.
Yeah, George Kittle feels like a little bit of a bridge too far for me there. But like Sam Laporta as a, I don't know how owned he'll be relative to like Gibbs and Amon-Ra both feel like pretty comfy clicks for me though. Like, I would say one of those two falls in the Boomer Opto rather than Laporta. And so
yeah, for sure. Sam Laporta is not in the Boomer Opto.
Now here's a question. I'm just on my way to mushing this play. This was like my favorite play 2 days ago, and I'm just gonna mush the fuck out of it here. So David Njoku is like one of the best clicks in this contest, right? Because you're gonna have the Boomer Opto has to be either between Amari Cooper or Browns DST, right? Like,
Yeah.
aren't those are like
Yeah.
the Boomer Opto already has shirts made for both of those picks,
Right.
you know? So it's like, how squeezed does Njoku get? And isn't Njoku like literally he's TJ Hawkinson but cooler? You know, he's like cool
Right.
TJ Hawkinson now because he's just a target monster from Joe Flacco. And it's like in FFPC, which is tight end premium, people forget, like if David Njoku does one of those 14 target games, like you will require David Njoku to win any money.
Right.
And you know, the Browns definitely seem live to win their first round matchup, you know, like the Browns seem live to, like, if I told you, like, just picture this in your mind's eye, the Browns have upset the Ravens in the conference championship game and the Browns are going to the Super Bowl and Joe Flacco has just delivered the dagger to, you know, Baltimore and he goes on to one more Super Bowl, but without his old team. Like, is that really that out there? You know, like, is that really that crazy?
We've seen crazier things. Like,
yeah,
we've seen, like, the Giants won those Super Bowls with Eli Manning. Like, there's been some pretty crazy results. Like, it happens. And speaking of tight ends in that game, I wonder how far up there Evan Ingram gets in ownership.
He's Boomer Opto 100%, right?
Over ETN?
Yeah, because remember what Ingram did last year in the same spot? They're like underdog to the Chargers. He smashes pretty good. And you're in the same spot. And I gotta believe, you know, Pat, I was talking through some of these with Pat, and he thought Ingram was Boomer Opto. I said, really? Like, we really think they'll get there? And it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, the FFPC crowd are many things, but like what they're not is guys that aren't like paying attention to the news. You know, like they're definitely plugged in. Like they might think about things a little differently than
of course.
But like they're aware that Evan Ingram has been like this, you know, short ADOT target hound, especially in matchups where, you know, the Jags are getting pressured. You know, where they're trying to get the ball out quick.
Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha. Where they're playing that idea that they know how the game is going to go,
right?
And they will have to operate through Evan Ingram.
Yeah, and I think too with Christian Kirk coming back, it actually funnels more ownership to Evan Ingram because it makes all the Jags pass catchers a little murkier. Yeah. And so then when you're like, they're all the same, let me just take the guy that gets 1.5 points for reception.
Right.
And so I do think Evan Ingram makes
and then people are going to be nervous about Travis Etienne because of how up and down he is.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, that honestly makes me think that the Jaguars might be a pretty good harder soft fade.
Oh yeah. Jags seem very, very nice as a fade there. And then I already talked about this, you know, more so, again, as a systemic thing for the AFC. Like, think about the Bills. Like, who are you excited to click on the Bills for this contest? Like, not really any.
You're just begrudgingly clicking Diggs.
Yeah, and the fantasy points have just been through, like, it's all Josh Allen, right? I mean, like, sometimes you get the James Cook game out there, but it's like, what if instead I just soft or hard fade the Bills and I take Nico Collins? You know, like, that feels pretty good to me. Like, you're getting like probably, you know, 1% combinatorial ownership on Bills soft or hard fade plus Nico Collins. And
right.
So it's like, that's almost the same thing. This is the crazy part about this contest. That's almost the same thing as doing like Jaden Reed Cowboys soft fade.
Yeah.
But the probability of the Bills getting upset is way higher than the probability of the Cowboys getting it. And so it's just like, and the players project, like, your 2v2 is like way more favorable to do it the Nico Collins way, right? So it's just like, rather than pick some random Bill and you're like, I hope it's 2021 and they're good at fantasy again, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Where, like, they're probably like what, 3.5 point favorites against the Texans in Vegas, and that corresponds to like what, a 60% probability. I'm sort of making stuff up, but something like that. And you get to have like a 1% combinatorial ownership on a 40% outcome.
Yeah, it's like that's why this game is so fun.
Yeah.
But as a Bills, now if I wanted to go bullish on the Bills, do you think Kincaid, like I know I've been a Kincaid hater this season,
Right.
but hear me out. Since no one's doing anything on the Bills offense outside of Josh Allen, why don't I follow my Evan Ingram logic of I'm just going to take the guy that gets 1.5x on his receptions? Like, do you think it's crazy to do Kincaid?
I think if you're doing Kincaid, you're still playing a Bills loss.
Yeah, you're right. So it's just better. It's better to do the fade then. Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're probably still getting similar ownership, but I feel like that's like almost like you're betting them to lose.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I think that one's smelling your own farts a little too much. You're getting a little too smart here if you're doing that one. But anyway,
and I think that's. I mean, Jake Ferguson feels like there's no fucking point, right? Like
I've had a couple people tell me that they think that might be one of the sharper ways to play the Cowboys. You're playing for a round 2 exit, not a round 1, right? And you're playing that CeeDee Lamb gets goosed.
I think you're playing for a round 1 exit if you do Jake Ferguson, because that's like it happens over 1 game, but feels very unlikely, extremely even more unlikely over 2 games.
You don't think that if like let's just say CD gets like pretty goose, like 6 for 40 in the game that they lose, right? They go to round 2, he goes 6 for 40, so that's 10 points, and he has a good, not great game in the first 20 something points, and then you get 2 games where Jake Ferguson gets 6 for 60 and a touchdown in both, like
so CD scores combined 30 points, and then Jake Ferguson scores over combined 30 points.
Yeah. He gets 18 just from the receptions, and then you get the extra 12 from the yardage, right? And then you get the touchdowns, you're 42. So, like, I think it's thin. I don't think you're wrong. I think it's thin that
right.
Jake Ferguson's good, but
my sort of point was I'm sort of expecting like CD to be like, and I know you guys project ownership and better than me, and I'm expecting that to be one of the CD to be one of the mega smash plays.
Could even be like 90%, right?
90%. And then in actuality, you can get Dak Prescott at maybe like sub 10. And it's like, well, if you're going to be contrarian there, like Dak Prescott at like somewhere between 5 and 10, that feels very, very like very good.
Now you're speaking my language, Draco. We're talking Cowboys to the Super Bowl. I'm here for it.
Yeah, and I think that probably is what you're talking about there, where you're playing into the conference championship probabilities and all that sort of stuff. But I get the Jake Ferguson thing where we're showing here that he's running 80% of routes. He's 18% targets per out run, which is solid. It's solid. And can he get 10 catches over 2 games and 100 yards over 2 games and a touchdown? Yes. Like 100% he can do that. And then maybe see if you're really betting against CD, then why not bet him all the way down?
Yeah. So I honestly hadn't even got to the Dak contrarian play. I was just like, if Dak gets there, CD's just such an alpha that it's, but no, I think you're right. That would be a really interesting way to play it. So Cowboys will probably be one of the interesting spots to attack here. But yeah, again, like you said earlier, it's not like if you have 3 teams, you're doing 2 Jake Ferguson. It's like if you have 20 teams, if you get a hair up your butt and you're feeling real ornery, then you might click Jake Ferguson one time.
Yeah. I agree for sure. And then, I mean, there's no
Next-
point.
Next
Next chart.
chart.
I mean, Noah Gray is the only.
Noah.
And he's barely drafted, and rightfully so.
Yeah, in playoff best ball, you can sell me a little Noah Gray, but in FFPC, there's not a snowball's chance in hell I'm ever clicking Noah Gray.
Right? Yeah. Just doesn't compute.
Hey Draco, do
Yeah.
you remember in like week 2 when I said CeeDee Lamb is moving up and to the right?
You know why I remember? Because you tell me every fucking week.
I mean, it couldn't have been a truer alpha performance this season. Man, just gotta clap it up for my guy CeeDee Lamb. That's some alpha shit. So that was great. You know, we're seeing this is a pretty stable chart. Obviously, we're through the season at this point. We're seeing AJ Brown like slide precipitously in these playoff best ball drafts, and he's very clearly an alpha. And like you mentioned, the Eagles are starting to get back on the wagon offensively, and Devonta Smith has the ankle sprain. Like, to me, this feels like it's all setting up to like, can't you see that AJ Brown might be the guy you need in the first round of the playoffs?
Oh yeah, didn't one of the coaches say like this week? You know, sometimes you just have to force feed AJ Brown. Right, that's just what you got to do.
I hadn't caught that, but I mean that the stars are aligning. You know, like I think it's coming. It's coming to bury the fuck out of me with my like almost 0 AJ Brown. So
AJ Brown is a hard one to do because to get him without Hurts doesn't feel great. And then you have to do the 1-2 turn thing where you're getting Hurts AJ Brown, and you feel like a moron because you're like every fucking person is doing this.
Yeah,
so
now
it's
now
a hard
you
one
can
to get
let
to.
it slide. I think what I'm gonna do for me personally is oftentimes when I get Lamar at like the 4, because I'm taking Lamar like at the 4 now because you kind of have to get him.
Yeah.
And I want to maintain my overweight Lamar position. It won't maintain what it's at right now of like 30% because it's just not possible now with how high he goes. But yeah, when I take Lamar at the 4, what I had been doing was any 49er that comes back. So it used to be that you could almost always get Lamar Ayuk at the turn.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of combos with that. And I had a lot of Lamar Debo from early in the cycle of the contest. And now I'm just doing Lamar Kittle. But what I think I need to start doing, just so that when the inevitable happens and AJ Brown just buries me all the way in week 1 of the playoffs, I have some Lamar AJ Brown teams where maybe I'm not even playing that it's the Eagles as the Super Bowl opponent to the Ravens, but I'm playing it as AJ Brown got my Lamar team out of week 1, and I really needed that. So that's note to Sack. I'm doing that this week. I'm going to grab some AJ Brown with my Lamar.
I think though, just to play devil's advocate, you know more about this contest than I do. You take AJ Brown in the second round. You're betting on the Eagles. Like you started a substantial bet on the Eagles, right?
Yeah, you are. But I think that number one, there are times I've seen AJ Brown slide to the 3rd, and so I might just like open myself up to being willing to take that over like, you know, now I'm sacrificing getting a Tony Pollard that I normally would have taken there instead. But you know, usually I'm taking Tony Pollard as an advance rate piece too. So yeah, like I think that's okay to do those early one-offs within structure of like I'm still within 4 teams that could conceivably
right. Yeah.
championship.
You still have with your Ravens stack. If you have 4 of them, you tack on AJ Brown. That's still a viable playoff.
Yeah, but maybe I'm doing something like you know, I'm doing Eagles and Rams then as my, and then I might go just with literally 5 Ravens on the other side so that I'm set for whatever. If it is Niners Ravens, I'm still Gucci. I got 5 Ravens live for it. That way I don't have to lean into, because I've got Eagles Rams that aren't going to be on bye. I can have 5 of those with Stafford as quarterback, you know, or I mean, shoot, even when you get the really deep hurt slide, you know, you can do Yeah, there are times looking back, thinking about my drafts the last 2 days, there are times where like AJ Brown and Hurts are both available at like the 3-4 turn when I had Lamar. And I just should have done that because it's like, I don't think that's going to be super available for a long time. Even like,
Right.
I think this is the window that you can get that. And I think that next week, this week 18, the Eagles probably will continue to trend up. There's nowhere to go but up. They ain't going down after losing to the Cardinals. So I think maybe they get back on track a little bit. The prices, get a little more normalized. And all of a sudden I'm sitting here thinking, gee, I wish I had done some of that, Lamar, 149er AJ Brown Hurts stuff that had been available to me, although rarely. So anyway, I'm just thinking through that.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. So yeah, I think the sort of alphas, they all make sense. Everybody knows who the alphas are. Like everyone knows if you're playing Bills, you want Stephon Diggs. I think it's a little interesting seeing Devonta Smith in the sort of like negative regression portion of this chart, like right next to our beloved friend Adam Thielen. But he's been sliding hard, and so I think the market has more than reacted to some worsening fundamentals and the injury for Devonta Smith too.
Yeah, I'm pretty low on Devonta Smith. Staying consistent with my Eagles fade, and again, I'm still scared that fade buries me now. But I want to play it more through AJ Brown than anything. I think at this point. But let's go to the next chart because there's some guys on the next one that I think are really interesting conversations for playoff best ball, and that's the Dolphins wide receivers of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You've got the Jalen Waddle ankle injury where he should be good for week 1 of the playoffs. Right now I'm leaning towards he plays and he is, maybe not 100%, but he's out there. He's running his full complement of
You're not getting a pure zero, and we're not that worried about round 1 advance rate either.
Right. But there's lots of times actually where I'm ending up with Jalen Waddle and a Dolphins running back as 2 of my only 5 live players in round 1 because I'm playing for like a Baltimore and 49ers Super Bowl. And then I find myself getting a little queasy about the Jalen Waddle clicks. I'm like, oh God, if he's not actually back, like, am I just nuking this thing? So I personally feel like that's a little risky. So I kind of weigh that in and sometimes like tie break away from, if there's another viable path, I might do the other viable path rather than go in and embrace that additional risk. But like, if that's your best path, you just lean into it and you eat the risk. And you're like, I know, I understand what I'm getting myself into. There will be some times where week 1 of the playoffs comes, Jalen Waddle's out there for a couple snaps, and then he goes into the blue medical tent again, and you're just like, well, there goes that really cool Lamar and CMC team that I had. That was fun while it lasted. But anyway, I do think the Dolphins receivers are really interesting because you're getting Hill to slide a lot now. Like, I've been getting quite a bit of Hill and Lamb in the gauntlet. And I got to tell you, that was not available earlier in the contest. So it's like, that's, even though those are lower probability teams to meet in the Super Bowl, it's like, my God, man, if you told me, because I've had some where I'm like, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, Jalen Waddle, Devon Chan, Brandon Cooks, and then whichever of the 2 quarterbacks. And I'm like, I have the stone. We show up to the Super Bowl and this team made it. Like, we can just cut me the check, like save the time, like no one's beating that. And so I think those types of builds are really interesting where it's like, wasn't available earlier in the contest. It's players that have such a strong projection relative to the other options deeper on the team. It's like, all right, the guy that I missed out on was Rico Dowdle. So Rico Dowdle needs to outscore 2 of Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, Devon Chan. to even crack the, he has to beat
Right.
2 of them for me to lose. So it's like, and that's kind of the same thing I was talking about for the Chiefs, where
Right.
like, hey, I can get all the Chiefs and other people didn't have it like this. You put yourself in a position where when you do make the finals with that, even though that happens at a lower frequency, that those teams are the ones in the Super Bowl, you win all the money. And so I like builds like that. Those to me are enjoyable, because then it's just like, I only really had to do 2 things right. I had to get through round 1 and round 2, and round 3 like damn near advances itself when you play this contest in the optimal way.
Mhm.
And then you're in the Super Bowl with the nuts, and it's like, that's a fun sweat. I sure do enjoy sweating the nuts. It's like we turned over the hole cards on the turn, and it's like, oh, I have a full house and you're drawing to a flush. Like, feel pretty good about where I'm at, So
Right.
um
One thing that's sort of noteworthy here to me, I've been a little queasy about taking Brandon Cooks, and this chart probably does a good explanation why. Where he's at 80 to 85% route share, so he's running a lot of routes, but he's not running all the routes. And then his weighted target per run is just 40%, and I'm pretty sure he's run a little bit hot on touchdowns. And it's like obviously in Cowboys make the Super Bowl, you have Dak Prescott, like you want Brandon Cooks, but I'm starting to wonder if like if you don't have Dak, like should you be taking Brandon Cooks on a secondary Cowboys stack at all? Like it feels sort of weak.
That's interesting. I definitely see the merit to like not doing Brandon Cooks if you don't have Dak. But at that point in the draft, the options you're looking at are
weak.
1v1 me, Brandon Cooks, David Njoku. It's like they're close.
Right. Yeah.
1v1 me. The ones where you win the 1v1 hard in projection are like 1v1 me, Brandon Cooks, Puka Nacua, right?
Right.
And that's one where if you have a lot of Cooks already, maybe you do start doing that, even though it's lower probability the Rams make. But if you do end up with the Rams facing the Cowboys in round 1 of the playoffs, that's probably a really sick way to balance out that Brandon Cook stuff, because now not only are like you getting the higher projected player, but you're also benefiting when those Dallas teams lose out. So I think that's interesting. I probably think the way that I'm going to account for that is doing the Puka Cooks 1v1 on teams where it's within structure.
Yeah. And I do, it does make me think like, so what do you think the probability is that the Cowboys beat the Rams? Like, is it 65%?
I was going to go like 60.
60%?
Yeah.
So, are the Rams really 40%? Well, I guess the big issue for the Rams then is that they have to then have to beat the 49ers.
Right, and I'm a pessimist for the I've been hurt so many times, Drico. You got to understand. And the Cowboys too, like one of the biggest warts on the Cowboys is lack of offensive line depth. And Tyler Smith just literally tore his plantar fascia. By the way, one of the funniest injury report things, not funny that this man tore his plantar fascia, which is extremely painful, like especially when you're like 300 plus pounds, like that sucks. I feel really bad. He's on a scooter right now. I promise you, he's on a scooter.
Yeah, of course.
But the injury report that I saw was that his status was in question for week 18. Are you fucking joking me?
What's the question? Like, how long? How is he going to get out of bed?
This 300-pound monster man like has to put his full weight on a torn plantar fascia. Like, dude, I know like real mortals that tore their plantar fascia where they were scooter gang for like 6 weeks.
Right.
Like, I know these are like different types of human beings than mortals.
Right, and they're going to be giving them injections, but that is not
But my God, man, like that sounds crazy to me. So that's scary to me as a Cowboys fan. Like one of our best offensive linemen on our strongest side of our line is weak now. Like he's either majorly hobbled or we're playing a backup. And the Cowboys have shown like, you look at some of the most embarrassing losses the Cowboys have had this season. It's like, oh, Tyron Smith was out. You know, like the Cowboys are missing someone on that line and the depth is non-existent. So that's part of where my pessimism comes in. But anyway,
just checking something here. Where is Justin? Like I'm looking at Quez Watkins here at 70 to 75%. Weighted targets, or say routes run, I should say, and then like just an abysmal 20% weighted targets per run, even though he's like a deep shot guy. Like it like I know you've been off the Eagles, but let's say you've got a Jalen Hurts team and you're looking to tag on another piece. Is someone like this, like, is that like, and the fact that they're barely drafted as well matters too. Like, is Quez Watkins draftable?
I don't think Quez Watkins is draftable, but could I interest you in Quintorius Lopez-Jones, better known as Julio?
Of course. Yeah, I've already taken Julio. Like, he just scored 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
It's fucking canon that if they win, that he has to be a huge part of it.
Yeah, no, it's fresh legs Julio Jones, baby, is the Eagles' savior in the playoffs.
There's no bigger backhanded compliment than calling an older player fresh, who hasn't played much, fresh legs.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't draft Quez. I would click some Julio though. But like the other thing with the Eagles, this is kind of like how it parallels a little bit with the FFPC playoff contest is the stuff that's the teams that people aren't as excited to click in best ball drafts are the ones where you don't have to get as cute on them, because if you show up to the finals, I mean, like, yes, the Eagles were heavily drafted earlier, you know, but like if you show up to the finals and you have a full Eagles stack and Kenneth Gainwell, you know, like not as many people are building full Eagles stacks anymore. They're more like one-off pieces or things like that. Or mini, you know, two player minis. So I'm not as into doing a Quez Watkins. The other thing is like
there's so many viable alternatives,
and whoever your opponent is on the AFC is probably a better alternative dart throw than Quez Watkins. Like you take the Chiefs as the, you know, it's Eagles Chiefs rematch. Pick any Chiefs dart throw. You know, you want Ravens. Okay, great. Any Ravens dart throw, like I like over Quez Watkins. You know, so
yeah,
that's. If you were the mega Eagles bowl, if you were like the Eagles are going to the Super Bowl and I won't hear anything else, then yeah, you mix some Quez Watkins in. But I'm coming from a place where it's like I have like almost no Eagles in my portfolio. I don't need to start getting down into the like really cutesy stuff. You know, I'll just, if I get there with the Eagles.
I'm just determined. So like this is stat chasing. I'm determined to make it about the stats and the charts. And this was my way of doing that. I think, too, what's really relevant is that, especially with Quez, you have 3 bona fide alpha target earners in like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, can't believe, what's the title? Dallas Goedert.
I thought you were going to go Julio Jones. I thought you were calling Julio Jones bona fide alpha. I was like, okay, we're going there.
No, not yet. But then you also have emerging Julio Jones, and so yeah, that's something where I guess not many people are doing it, and definitely makes sense to not do it.
Yeah. All right. Let's take it to the last chart here. Really, there's I think one guy now. There were 2 guys on this chart that were actually, that's a lie. I see Ravens players, so there's plenty of guys on this chart that are interesting, but Rashee Rice is like the crown jewel of this chart for playoff best ball, because Rashee goes, you know, 3rd round most of the time, maybe 4th round, and no one else here is going anywhere near that high. A guy that was going early in drafts when the Jags looked functional was Parker Washington when there were doubts of Christian Kirk coming back. That's fully off the menu for me now with Kirk back. Oh, but yeah, this is a whole smorgasbord of late round.
We got
playoff
Jameson
basketball.
Williams. We've got
Michael
Odell.
Gallup, Justin Watson, Odell, Jameson Williams. Let's see, who else do we have?
Chase Claypool.
Oh, gross. Braxton
That's a joke.
Berrios. Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's Cedric Wilson all the way for me if you're going to do that Miami wide receiver punt. But I think I even saw a little Rashad Bateman in here. Yeah, so like there's a lot of guys on here. That's the thing about playoff best ball. When we got to this chart in previous weeks, we were like Jaden Reed, Rashi Rice, Curtis Samuel. All right, let's not talk about anyone else because none of them are relevant. But playoff best ball, the threshold for points is so low in some Super Bowl scenarios, especially if it's hard to get 5 live players to the Super Bowl. If they're if a bye week team makes it, that just having anyone fill that 5th slot, because what ends up happening is you and 12 other people have the same 4 players that are alive, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they don't have a 5th active player, but you do, and it's Rashad Bateman. And it just so happens
4 points.
The game's playing out, and those 4 players that you share with those 12 people are the nuts so far.
Mm-hmm.
And all of you are 1st through 12th, and you're holding hands, chopping all the money right now. And then at the end of the game, Rashad Bateman catches 1 pass for 7 yards.
1 5-yard pass.
And that is $150,000 for you. That's why these guys matter.
Right.
So I've seen people talk about like, oh, I'd never click Rashad Bateman. I'd always click I'd much rather click a Calvin Ridley or a Christian Kirk as just a one-off to help me advance. And that's the reason why I showed that expected value calculation earlier. Because it's 1% boost in your, and that was only looking at round 3 where we're talking about, advancing 1 of 8. We're not even talking about the 1 out of 400. I just was looking at the calculation of your base finals expected value rate, not even considering how much of an advantage having a 5th player when you're in a group of, 10 or 20 teams that have the same 4 players as you. It gets magnified even more. Okay. So you already saw why it was important to click those guys just from go from round 3 into the finals point. But when you do the expected value calculation of I get there and there's 20 people duped with me, and Rashad Bateman only scores above 0 30% of the time. Well, that 30% of the time is $120,000 of EV for you. And so it's 0.3 times 120, 36 grand. That Rashad Bateman play was a $36,000 EV play for you when you get there.
Right.
So that's why. But anyway, all these gross guys, you'll become intimately acquainted with them if you do a lot of playoff best ball.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. Okay, well, this has been a lot of fun. We've sprinted through the 2-hour mark, 2 hours and 13 minutes. So good time to stop there. Like I said, this show has been a lot of fun to do with you this year, Zach, and looking forward to next year. Hopefully you don't abandon me as well. Yeah, been a lot of fun.
No plans on abandoning you, Drico. Wouldn't think of it. Yeah, I just feel super fortunate that you asked me to be on the show. I had a blast with you too, man. I feel like you made me a much better fantasy player this year.
Thank you.
The best thing about this game is when you find someone else where you really respect their opinion and you know that they're thinking about things in the right way, because it's so easy, especially for people that are really in the weeds on this stuff. You're doing a lot of your own work. You feel confident in the work that you're doing. It's really easy to think that you're the smartest guy in the room and let your ego get the best of you and only trust what you're doing, right? Or trust yourself and maybe a couple other people. But getting to work with you where you're able to challenge me on some stuff and make me rethink a position that I have, that's really helpful for me. And I think it's made me a much better player. And I'm really excited to get back to drafting best ball next season and hope one of our FFPC teams that we split next year ends up taking it down.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. And I'm really glad that I did propose you to the larger ship chasing guys. I think everyone would agree that it's been really really good.
Just trying to make you proud, Draco.
Well, let's we'll end it there.